to do that, but as I look through them, they address different issues, but I think that a lot of them may cancel each other out. Mike's preparing kind of a, just like what happened on, what was on 2390, which removed the contents. Section 1 dealt with, or section dealt with requirements of Secretary of KDHE and drug overdoses deaths. Section 2 dealt with the Secretary KDHE powers, penalties for violating section, applying to the, so on and so on. So I asked him to prepare something similar to that for 314 and 315. And that way it would be a lot easier for us. So while we're waiting, he'll be. What's that? I haven't said anything.
Oh,
no.
Okay, sorry.
No. Right. Just so we can kind of have an abbreviated deal of what each section does in these new bills. Any questions, members, while we're waiting? Mike Heim, the reviser, I'm familiar with as our committee reviser. No, I did not. And I don't know if there's confusion. Usually there's, a lot of times you're familiar with your revisers.
Yeah. If you were to want to pass the provisions of Senate Bill 314 and 315, since they amend the same statutes, I would combine them. I wouldn't do two versions of statutes. Does that make sense? So I wouldn't be making duplicative changes in both of those statutes multiple times. I would just mesh them together.
And I think that's what I saw as I read the two bills, that a lot of them dealt with different statutes. And that bill would be half the size that it was if it only dealt with not the same statutes. A lot of things are duplicated. Okay, well, committee questions while we're waiting? Okay. Yeah, questions about anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been thinking about some more practical implications of all these different provisions, and this information was very helpful to gain quick knowledge over what's all in here. And with the restrictions for local health, public health offices not to be able to close or quarantine, I'm thinking back to my years as a lifeguard, and I remember one very specific circumstance where we had a pool party, and a grandpa came up to me, and the family was kind of trying to hide it, but he's like, "That ain't no baby Ruth." So we take very specific precautions when there is fecal matter in the pool, close the pool down, shock it, and then test it, and we have to close it for a certain amount of time before it's safe again. So in the event that there is some sort of infectious disease outbreak, I know cryptosporidium is a common disease that can spread in the water like that, which is a serious disease, and I'm not a doctor, so I'll just say diarrhea forward. Something that we don't want spreading in our communities. Would a local public health officer be able to go to that site and close it down if a disease like that, an infectious disease, is encountered?
So again, I guess you're talking about a local officer that would go to a swimming pool or a facility like that and close something down. Is that what you're saying?
I guess any officer would. Is there any public health authority in an event like that?
Okay, well, that's why we have commissioners, like a Johnson County commissioner, city commissioner, et cetera. That's their job. So if they were to recommend, we understand there is an infection in this place, the same thing with a school, The school board would be the one to make the decision about that, not the officer.
I don't understand why a school board would close like a pool, like I mean, there are pools at hotels.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean I was giving you two mixed messages.
Oh, okay.
One would be like, I used the example of like a Johnson County Commissioner or a city council or whatever, but I was using an example like in a school, it would be the school board who would decide, we need to do this, not the medical officer in the area. They could make the recommendation that that needs to be done.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair. I would say that it would not be, it would depend on the facility. So I'm not familiar with who licenses pools, but if you're thinking about like a restaurant where there has been an outbreak of something, that is separate. That would be their licensing body, which is done at both the local and state level. And so if you had a bunch of violations, those health officers would still be able to go in and close down. And some of that's through the Department of Ag, so it wouldn't be addressed here. But as far as if there were to be an E. coli an outbreak, if there were not a list of infectious and contagious diseases that the secretary would have to be reported to the secretary, how that investigation would proceed would be affected by this bill. Does that make sense?
And again, and clarify, Jen, if I'm misspeaking, but as we talked about in committee, nothing is preventing the secretary, word is not requiring the secretary to put together a list. So if the secretary were reporting to the legislature or whomever that we have these lists of infectious diseases or whatever it may be, that's perfectly appropriate, correct?
So I'd say yes and no. So the secretary can make a list, but it doesn't have the force and effect of law if this were to go into effect unless and until the legislature were to adopt it. And so those protections that are put in place in the investigations, it would have to wait on the legislature adopting the list.
Thank you.
So if there were a new outbreak of some kind, something that we wouldn't know about yet, what would the time, like how long could that possibly take to be able to take action if it's not on the list?
So it would depend on the time of year, but if this were to go into effect July 1, an outbreak were to happen in September, the secretary could make the recommendation, and if the legislature did not choose to come back in a special session to address it, then it would be whenever the legislature comes back and takes it up.
Also, too, as we've seen before, the medical director, secretary, whomever, as we've seen before, could come on television. They have the authority to be able to say there is this outbreak, we have concerns, we would make these recommendations, et cetera, without having to come to the legislature, correct?
The ability to make recommendations is not affected by this law. It's the rules and regulations process that's affected.
So if I may, could you clarify that just for my own understanding? So they could actually operate and close and make regulations and close facilities without the legislative approval? Recommendations.
Yeah, like what do you mean close?
Or an outbreak of any type.
Close what?
That facility.
So that's under separate, usually it'd be a licensure authority. So the restaurant, yes, but a school, that authority would be taken away under this.
School had an outbreak of measles. Let's just use that. I know. So the secretary would have what kind of authority to?
Would not, under this bill, would not have the authority. The school board or the school district could.
Okay.
But the local health officer or the secretary of KDHE could not come in and close down the school.
It wouldn't be like there would be no avenue whatsoever to, thank you, Mike. Okay. Do we have any copies of this? I can just go off this. That's fine. I know I asked him in a very quick manner in about 30 minutes. Okay. So what I have here is the Secretary of the Health and Environment shall not, and 314 is what we're talking about now, shall not be required a child care or a child care facility to receive a COVID vaccine in 314. Nor shall a student enrolled in school for the first time be required to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. 315 amends dealing with employer waivers for employees and COVID-19 vaccine requirements to expand employees to include students attending public schools, non-public schools as part of the coursework, and interact with patients at a healthcare facility. Child care facilities shall grant exceptions for immunization requirements for sincerely held religious beliefs without inquiring into the sincerity of such beliefs. 65-508, school districts, first-time students, exception for sincerely held religious beliefs. Now, this is what every bill that we do should say. Absolutely. This boils down 20 pages of documents into this is what it does.
I would just clarify, Mr. Chair, that when it's regarding the employer-employee, if you look in the bill itself, it was in there, stricken, put back. It was inadvertently stricken, so it was just put back. That has not changed.
Members, questions? Mike, I appreciate your work. I want you to know that. I know it was very quick, and
It's extremely quick, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for any grammatical errors or whatever, but I think you get a little bit of an outline of what the two bills do.
this is exactly what I envisioned that we would have is all that. Any further questions? I would suggest that we put Senate Bill 6 is already in 2390, so that we would insert 314 and 315 into 2390.
And we accept that offer, Mr. Chair.
Oh, and with the one amend, a repeal of the meningitis. Okay.
So we would say amended 315.
Right. Further discussion? Okay. Okay. That's
Oh, I just want to go on the record as opposed, and I won't be signing. Thank you.
I wouldn't have been surprised. Any more discussion on those bills? Okay, so let's move on to
And
23.
And Mr. Chair, I would say, I believe Jenna came prepared with a agree that we could sign today.
Okay, who wants to start on? I'm not sure if we call it Senate Bill 233 or 26, whichever one.
I think it's Senate Bill 26, so Jenna, correct me if that's right, it would be, is there another name like substitute for Senate Bill 26 since it's a shell? We'll just call it Senate Bill 26, all right?
Okay. Okay, discussion.
All right. Senate Bill 233, and we can let, Jenna, would you like to give us a quick review?
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So just for clarification, Senate Bill 26 is, I believe, an insurance bill, and it was provided to this committee to use as, to put the contents of another bill into. And so what's being discussed is Senate Bill 233, and that would create a civil cause of action against a physician who performs a childhood gender reassignment service on any individual as a child, which is defined in the bill, and that would be things like a surgery that sterilizes or intended to sterilize, a mastectomy, or prescribing or administering certain types of medications, including puberty blockers. And this would exempt from this cause of action the treatment of a child who has a medically verifiable disorder of sex development. And it would allow a child who has been, had one of these childhood gender reassignment services performed on them to maintain a civil cause of action against the physician up to 3 years after the child turns 18. And in that civil cause of action, they could recover damages, including punitive damages, attorney's fees, things of that nature. Section 2 of the bill amends KSA 652836, and that is the statute that gives it affects the licensure of physicians. And at the end of this bill, it would be on page 6, it would provide that a physician's license shall be revoked upon a finding that the physician has performed a childhood gender reassignment service as defined in section 1. And so if a physician is found to have performed one of these procedures or giving this medication to a child, that physician would lose their license.
I would just add, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry that you all couldn't. You're welcome to go back and look at the committee meeting and see all of the conferees. We had a room, we even picked a bigger room. We had a room full of conferees. Most compelling were, I think we can all agree in this room that you can decide whatever you want to decide when you're an adult, whatever you decide that you would like to do. Whatever that may be, but children are too young to be making these very important lifelong decisions. And so therefore, some of the compelling testimony we heard were especially from young women who were talking about the huge mistakes that they had made and decision that was made. Many of them were whom already had what I would consider to be compelling reasons that they should have been seeking counseling, cutting themselves. We heard of the young women who felt like they had no friends, had attempted to commit suicide. And unfortunately, we're told maybe the reason was that you needed to transition to a different gender. Unfortunately, maybe they should have just gone into counseling to find out why they were anorexic or why, and autism seems to be one of the major compelling reasons that we found that was similar for all of these girls. So in looking at all of the data and looking what we've found is going on in other countries and other states who have said, hold the phone, let's stop allowing gender-affirming care, which was the original name of it, which was thought to be by many that this is how we should handle this, and instead found this is actually harming people and we need to wait until they're older to be able to do this transition. So we are just asking that, and that's all what Senate Bill 233 does, is that we are not going to allow physicians to start them down this road of transitioning while they're still a child.
Any questions? Boy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did you get the information of what other countries that we're looking at here? Oh. Okay. Okay, thank you. Yes, and I do appreciate here, I know Minnesota has just become a safe haven for trans families who don't feel safe living in one of these states that are in the red here. I just, after yesterday, we had a bill that was called Fairness in Women's Sports, and many, many people got up there and said, this isn't about transgender issues. And then the very next day, we have a whole new committee here, sitting here. I would rather have a doctor at a table than me, but I guess at the very least I can say this makes it feel very much like it is about erasing transgender identities and denying them health care that they may need. And I think this is just a very sad and dangerous path to go down as legislators trying to interfere between doctors and their patients and criminalize doctors to the point where they wouldn't be able to help certain patients. And I guess I'll look a little bit more at the bill to see if I have any more specifics, but I think I have a pretty good understanding of what this does. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that does not criminalize. A doctor could lose his license or her license, and a doctor is subject to civil action, but does not criminalize. I think you'll maybe passing this out later, but I'm not sure who all has this. This was an article that came out from Missouri from a woman who came forward, and she has worked in several gender clinics. She calls herself to the left of Bernie Sanders. And she thought she was going to be helping people, but she began becoming a whistleblower after young people were reporting at age 17, 18, having their breasts cut off and saying, can I get them put back on? I should not have done that. Of course, that's impossible because these are irreversible things that they're doing to themselves. Some of the stories talking about 5, 6 girls coming in at the same time, kind of like, let's all lock arms and go get our ears pierced. It was, let's all go do this. This is kind of a herd mentality to go have this done. Again, nothing against the trans community, and we had folks that testified that were in the lesbian community and other communities such as that saying, we don't think this should be done to children. We agree. We think that they should wait until they are adults. And talking about how the regrets that families have had in doing this with their children. So I would encourage anyone to read this article that came out from the Missouri side. And as to the information as to the other countries, I believe I had that in my notes, but that was... I know for a fact it's New Zealand. New Zealand, here we go, England, Finland, Sweden. And then New Zealand had scrubbed the definition of hormone blockers as being reversible. And again, just to clarify, we were told that hormone blockers by medical community, hormone blockers for children who maybe a young girl was going to go through puberty at age 7, and parents thought, ooh, that's a little early for that. Could we block that for a while? And then they did that for a while. Then the child goes into normal puberty. For folks who are doing this, and the bill just says for the purpose, puberty blockers for the purpose of transitioning. That's very different because if they start on those puberty blockers, then they go on to testosterone or estrogen, and they never go through normal puberty. And was told in testimony is this puts them in a line of being a medical patient the rest of their lives, having to continue with these hormones, having to continue with these things the rest of their lives. They call the surgery top surgery rather than having a mastectomy. And doing castrating, somebody now, we haven't heard of that happening for someone under 18, definitely not in our state yet, but we have seen that elsewhere. So we see that Florida, South Dakota, Utah, and others have serious concerns about this, as you saw on the state map, the number of states that are looking at this. And then, of course, England, Finland, and Sweden stopped the gender-affirming care and had very strong concerns about this for children.
Can I have that map back?
Absolutely.
So just for clarification, Jenna, you gathered this information. 10 states have banned that. Is that correct? Banned gender-affirming care?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's been a few updates since that little map that I found has been whenever ABC News made it. But since then, I believe that Indiana as well as Idaho have signed things into law. They have not yet taken effect. And I will note that there are 2 states, and I didn't bring my map with notes on it with me, but there are 2 states whose legislation or bans are currently under a judicial, a judicial like ban, or they've been enjoined at this point. They're under, there's litigation against those.
2 states in a litigation.
Yes, I believe it's Arkansas and, I believe it's Arkansas and Alaska whose bans have been enjoined judicially.
I might also add, I'm just bringing up some things that were testified to in committee. One young woman who came to speak, her name was Prisha, and she said, I feel like I killed a child and it was me. You can see lots of stories like this on Reddit, D-Trans. They have 40,000 members. Independent Women's Voice has been collecting these stories and these videos of people who are willing to speak up. What we found is a lot of parents were afraid to speak up. They were afraid that they would be attacked socially for not supporting their child, or you shouldn't have done it, or you should have done it. And they were afraid to mention, and a couple of people who spoke up mentioned her daughter Abigail committed suicide after her transition. She thought it would solve all of her problems, but it just created more problems by doing this. Again, no one in this room is against somebody if you want to transition or whatever choices that you make as an adult, just not as a child. They're not ready for this, especially irreversible, life-changing alterations.
Thank you. Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And since my colleague from the Senate isn't here who was privy to this testimony and I was not, I do want to just put on the record that I see opponent, at least there may have been more, but from the supplemental note on SB 233, it says there was also opponent testimony by an advanced practice registered nurse, a physician, representatives from the ACLU, the Kansas chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, Kansas Interfaith Action. So it sounds like there was also evidence provided that the bill would negatively affect the lives of transgender youth and young adults, including directly causing an increase in suicide-related deaths. And it prevent parents from protecting and caring for the health of their minor children and making decisions in partnership with medical providers without government infringement. Thank you.
As I mentioned, we did have lots of testimony, and Mr. Chair, I was basically explaining why we had this bill. One of the discussions was about, one woman was told that her daughter, they said to the parents, do you want a son or a dead daughter? Basically saying if you don't allow your child to transition, your child will commit suicide. But there's no data to prove that. In fact, we've had data that came up in conversation about, or in testimony about, we have seen suicides for children after they've transitioned, and that a child might have already tried to commit suicide before even considering transition. They were already having issues with, counseling or needing counseling, and had other issues where they had attempted to commit suicide, not necessarily related to this. And you're welcome to go back and look at the testimony, and to be clear, one of the women who was there who said, I'm not necessarily representing the Kansas Physician or Pediatrics Association, but yet was representing the Kansas Pediatric Association, said at this time they still adhere to the gender affirming care of the American Association of Pediatrics. And that was mentioned in committee.
Representative Humphreys, do you have any questions?
I don't know that I have any questions, but this is an issue that I have dug into. I knew that there's a chance that we would be having this sort of bill, and so I did research early on. And I understand the Senate has heard this bill, and we ran out of time in the House to hear the bill. It's not really a very complicated bill. It's just, actually, for a bill, it's pretty short. It's only about 3 pages that have any changes. And I would say that my feeling about the bill is that this is about children, as you said. It's not about adults, that adults can choose what they want to do. But this body, a few years ago, forbid anyone under 18 from being able to use tanning beds. And so we're protecting our youth from things that we think they're not ready to make decisions about yet. And I feel like that's what this is about. And now, are these youth that are, as you mentioned, might be troubled and might need extra help? Absolutely. We should give that to them. We should help them through these difficult times. But to encourage, and I think it is encouraging, and I have heard stories from people who, detransitioners, many stories, that felt like they were not adequately screened before they were told this is the answer to all your problems. And that is super concerning to me. And so take care of youth that are struggling with this area, but let's not move into gender reassignment services that are irreversible. And so that's why I think it's a good bill, and I don't think I have any more questions about it, but I felt like it was important to mention that this bill is not new to me, and I have been doing research on this for months now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I tend to agree with my colleague here. I think that folks under 18, we have constant laws about alcohol, about how we don't believe that they can make good decisions under the age of 18. And this is another one, and I think this is far more serious than any not drinking alcohol or smoking or any of that kind of stuff. We just raised the age to 21, but this is far more serious. Once they become 18, I feel like they can make that decision for themselves, but I think that younger folks are very susceptible to a lot of things at that age, peer pressure, all kinds of things. And so I too support this. So with that, I would move Senate Bill 233 into Senate Bill 26.
I'm against this. I oppose.
And just for the record, can we make it clear that you intend to take out the contents of what's currently in Senate Bill 26 and then replace it?
Yes, remove the contents of Senate Bill 26 and replace it with Senate Bill 233.
So if there's, I do not have an agree to disagree prepared, but I have asked my secretary to start working on that.
And I have word that my colleague from the Senate is on her way. I would like her to have the opportunity to make comments, especially because she's been way more involved in this throughout the session than I have.
Of course. Very good. Anything else, committee? Let's wait for Senator Petty. Okay, so just for Senator Petty's reference, we placed the contents of 315 and 314 in 2390, House Bill 2390. And then we had discussion on this bill, and we've removed the contents of Senate Bill 26 and replaced it with 233, Senate Bill 233.
I, well, well, on the first, I think before, on the first set of bills, when we were discussing earlier with Senate Bill 315 and 314, those bills, 314 and 315, they would now, there could potentially no longer be a set of recommended vaccinations that our children should be taking, and there would be no authority within our health departments or our schools to encourage parents to have their child vaccinated. That impacts the safety and the health of our children in our schools, and particularly our daycares where we have our youngest children. And it's such a backward step when we know that vaccines are safe and they protect all of us, whether adults or children. So that would be my reason there. When it comes to the transgender, I think that we talk about wanting to support parents' rights, and in that particular bill, it negates parents' rights to support their children in their decisions. So for those reasons, I would not support either one of these.
So this is a little bit after the fact, but on 2390, what would be a committee in the House and the Senate that would meet regular enough to address some of those issues that we were talking about earlier, as far as the Senate President and the Speaker of the House? So how often the LLC committee or the State Finance Council, is anybody aware of how often they meet to address some of those issues versus a special session like you had mentioned?
You may remember during some of the COVID bills, there were provisions put in reviewing executive orders by the governor that could be reviewed by the Legislative Coordinating Council. I don't know if there's a statutory requirement on how often they meet, but they are able to meet during the interim when the full legislature is not present.
And I also believe that they met a lot of times by Zoom or WebEx.
Yeah, I mean, and as Mike pointed out to me, that they don't have lawmaking authority. So if you put in here that the legislature has to take action, the LCC cannot override that. So it would have to be specific language in a bill that would give some of this authority, like an amendment would be required.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify that something that was just said about there would be no recommendation of immunizations list. Of course, there could be a recommendation. They just cannot mandate that list. And from the Secretary's office, then it was also mentioned about encouraging parents to have vaccinations for their children. Of course, you can encourage parents. Again, all we're doing is saying that the Secretary's office and a medical officer cannot mandate. They can recommend, they can educate, but they cannot mandate. And that would be in Senate Bill 6.
Okay. Very good, thank you. Committee, anything else? Okay, we're adjourned.